Now, in this week's Let's Talk Some Star Wars video, I want to begin by discussing the results of the most recent poll I did, where I asked all of you where your level of hope is currently at for Episode 9. And before I get into it, I want to let you know I'll probably put up this same poll or a similar one a few more times between now and when Episode 9 finally comes out next December, to see if people's excitement waxes or wanes as we get closer to the release of the movie, and learn more details and see trailers and things like that. I also want to make a little disclaimer here that yes, the results of any poll I put up asking a question like this one are going to be somewhat skewed because I have, shall we say, a less than positive view towards The Last Jedi. And those who watch my videos will likely have a propensity to feel the same way as me, though as I always say, I do appreciate those who disagree with me about The Last Jedi, but watch my videos anyway, and I especially appreciate those who state their case for The Last Jedi in the comments in a civil way. I've had many great debates with you all, and I hope a year from now there'll be no more need for debates because almost all fans are just talking about how great Episode 9 was. In other words, I still do have hope for Episode 9, but as we look at the results of this poll, half of the people who voted have either no hope or are very doubtful at this point, with another 37% hoping for the best but fearing the worst, which means only 13% of people who voted have a truly good feeling about this next movie. And again, I want to reiterate that those numbers will be a bit skewed, and if a very pro The Last Jedi channel conducted the same poll, they'd probably get some different results. Nevertheless, again, roughly half of those who voted, or approximately 12,500 people, don't have much hope, or any at all, for this next movie. And sure, in the grand scheme of things, that's not a lot of people. That's a fraction of the overall fan base. But that's still 12,000 fans who most likely are or were huge fans of this franchise going into the sequel trilogy, and now have absolutely no faith in it. And it really does make me wonder how much these percentages would actually fluctuate or change if a larger and broader spectrum of the fan base was polled. Would they be radically different and trend much more towards the positive? Or are there more disgruntled fans out there than some want to admit to? And of course, depending on whose opinion on the matter you ask for, you're likely going to get a much different answer to that question. But if I had to answer that as honestly as I possibly could, I'd say a vast majority of the fans fall somewhere in the middle when it comes to their feelings towards The Last Jedi. Most probably neither loved it nor hated it, though may lean one way or the other somewhat. Which then leads us to the question, which of the two extremes is greater? Are there more people who despise the movie, or more who absolutely love it? And to that I would say there are more fans who utterly hate this movie and consider it the worst in the franchise, more so than there are those who would be at the opposite end of the spectrum, and consider it a masterpiece or their favorite in the series. Okay, now let's move on to the top rated comment from the poll, and it came to us from Tristan Coward, who cast their vote for their hopes being Sky High, but then said, "I love Sky High, great movie. Episode 9 is going to be absolute garbage." And by the fact that this was the highest rated comment, I'm going to assume many of you out there think Sky High was a better movie than The Last Jedi, which does sound absolutely crazy, because for whatever reason I actually saw Sky High some dozen or so years ago when it came out, and I can say that, yeah, it wasn't a bad movie by any stretch, but if you told me back then that actual Star Wars fans would consider it a better movie than Episode 8 would be someday, I don't know that I would have ever believed you or wanted to. Okay, let's move on to the next highest rated comment then, or the top rated one that doesn't promote an old Kurt Russell movie, and it came to us from Joseph Gardner, who said, "What is there to look forward to? Luke's dead, Han's dead, Snoke is dead, Carrie is actually dead, rest in peace. Knights of Ren don't exist apparently, Soyega doesn't care, Rose is pointless, Poe is cucked, Hux and Phasma are jokes, Rey wins at everything regardless, and Kylo is just emo. There's no conflict, it's all pointless." And look, though I do still have my hope for Episode 9, there is a reason why this was the top rated non-Kurt Russell comment, because this is exactly how a lot of people feel right now. Love or hate The Force Awakens, so much setup from that movie gets ignored or subverted by The Last Jedi. I mean, they made an entire movie about trying to find Luke Skywalker. That is literally the plot of Episode 7. And then Episode 8 tells us he not only doesn't want to help, that he sees himself as a relic from the past and the last remnant of the order he believed in needs to die. But the sad part is that they really didn't need him anyway, not till the bitter end when the last remaining Jedi, and according to George Lucas, he would go on to be the greatest, most powerful Jedi there ever would be. He gave up his life for a dozen or so people in the hopes that his act, I guess, would bring hope back to the galaxy and encourage people to fight the First Order that had just taken over a couple days ago. Because the tyranny of the Empire and what Luke did to stop Vader and the Emperor 30 years ago has already been completely forgotten or something. No one apparently remembers the legend of Luke Skywalker anymore after just 3 decades. I mean, think about how absurd that is when you consider how many of us here on Earth, in the real world, celebrate the legend of Luke Skywalker, and to us he is a 100% fictional character, whereas to those in the Star Wars galaxy, he would have been the greatest legend of his time. There would have been frickin' holidays in his honor. And yet everyone's forgotten Luke, what the rebellion did, and how terrible the Empire was, again after just 30 years. And now they're willing to roll over and just let the First Order win without any sort of fight. And sure, the Hosnian system was destroyed, and that was where the New Republic was based. But again, that happened only days ago in the story, and you can't tell me no one in the galaxy would be willing to fight back against the First Order, who had just committed an unspeakable atrocity, especially when they learn the weapon they had used to do this has since been destroyed. You also can't tell me that no one other than a dozen resistance fighters on Crate that Luke gave his life to help save would have started to organize against the First Order. And you can't tell me the First Order simultaneously blew up the Hosnian system and occupied every planet that may have risen up to oppose them, completely independent of the New Republic. Not to mention, how could they even start to occupy potentially rebellious worlds when they had a couple dozen of their Star Destroyers chasing a whole 3 resistance ships that were running out of fuel and, theoretically because of hyperspace tracking, could have never escaped anyway? Wasn't a couple dozen ships overkill when you should have been securing the galaxy that the opening crawl of The Last Jedi says you reign over? I mean, say what you will about the prequels, but they are brilliant in the fact that they showed how Palpatine made free people willingly give up that freedom in the name of security, and no one realized what was happening until it was much too late. They showed how one man didn't so much conquer the galaxy with brute force, but he instead just convinced the people of the galaxy to give him absolute authority. But now in the sequels, we have to believe that a bunch of militarily inept buffoons that call themselves the First Order have the entire galaxy quaking in fear and ready to give up without a fight, when we've seen one of their leaders, Hux, get prank called by Poe and made to look like a complete fool, when we've seen one of their best troops, that being Phasma, get essentially bested and killed twice now, when we've seen their supreme leader, Snoke, who did look intimidating, get tricked and got cut in half by their top enforcer, that being Kylo Ren, who we are now supposed to believe after his temper tantrums and his inability to beat an untrained Force user, is going to lead the First Order to the proverbial Promised Land and make them a believable threat. And though the sequel trilogy has had many problems, a lack of good villains should be towards the top of that list, especially when you consider that in the previous 2 trilogies, great villains were one of the true strengths and what really drove the story. And without truly frightening, competent villains, it's hard to make great heroes, which is one of the issues with Rey. She's just besting a bunch of idiots. And now that I'm done with that little tangent, let's move on to just a couple more comments before I wrap this up. And I'm only going to do a few more because, well, most people had very similar things to say in regards to their hopes, or should I say lack thereof, for Episode 9. So I'm going to try and highlight some that were a bit more positive in nature, though they were very few and far between. And before I do get to them, let me take a quick moment to say thank you to everyone who leaves comments. I literally do read all of them that are left on the polls, and as many as I can that are left on videos. And you guys certainly don't make this easy for me to pick and choose which to use in these Let's Talk Some Star Wars videos. So now let's get to a comment from Star Wars History Archives who said, for one, J.J. Abrams is back in the director's chair. After the 50-50 8th episode, hopes are as high as can be for proper direction and hopefully to reunite the fanbase. Please answer me this. Why wasn't J.J. asked to direct all 3 sequel films? And to answer your question, I don't recall why JJ wasn't asked to do all 3 films, or if he was but couldn't for some reason due to other obligations, or he just didn't want to. If someone knows the answer, by all means please let me know in the comments below. Anyway, to paraphrase what Zack Smith and many others said in their comments, no matter what the reason is, Disney and Lucasfilm should have gotten someone who had one singular vision for the whole trilogy and let them write and direct the whole damn thing. Or at the very least, decided on all their writers and directors in advance, and force them to hash out the entire outline for the whole story before they started making these movies. Now we move on to what Chris Cash had to say. If JJ is allowed to do his own version of Episode 8, I'm sky high, meaning The Last Jedi is full retcon or placed as a bad vision. Otherwise, I don't see how the movie can be great. And okay, so this isn't the most positive comment, but again, there really weren't many of them. Nevertheless, to respond to it, I don't think JJ will fully retcon Episode 8, but I do think he's been given free rein to do whatever he feels he needs to do to make a great movie, even if that means undoing some of the things that got established in Episode 8, like Rey's parents being nobodies or Snoke being killed off, or maybe even the reason why Luke gave up on the Jedi. One way or the other, JJ has to do something with this story, because right now it's all on the shoulders of Rey and Kylo Ren to wrap up the entire Skywalker saga, and neither one of them feel like they have an important place in that overall story, other than Kylo Ren, but that's just by default because of his bloodline. But I do think JJ was trying to set up their places in the bigger story by having Kylo speaking to the helmet of Vader, while the old lightsaber of Anakin Skywalker called out to Rey and directed her to Luke. It was almost like they were setting up the legacy of Anakin Skywalker versus the legacy of Darth Vader, which makes sense for the closing chapter of this bigger story. And what JJ was going for exactly and how he planned to pull it all off is something I've theorized about elsewhere, but had all the writers of this sequel trilogy at least had that concept in their minds, that this was a battle of two legacies, Anakin versus Vader, well, I think this could have been a hell of a trilogy. In fact, when I did my own version of Episode 8, which I called The Lost Jedi, which some of you out there have of course seen and I appreciate, that's exactly the mindset I had going into it. Okay, and now to close this video out with a comment from my Discord server, and it comes to us from Santa Brian, who is a fan of The Last Jedi and has enjoyed all things Star Wars under Disney. And no, he's not about to preach how the haters of Episode 8 are all wrong and horrible people. Instead, like a vast majority of the Episode 8 fans, he's a sensible guy and can see both sides of this argument, and just wants to see the fan base mended. Anyway, he said as follows. My hope for 9 is that it reunites the fanbase to some degree, but at this point, hating on Star Wars has become far more popular than loving it. Many fans aren't willing to find a way to enjoy the sequels and fit The Last Jedi into their personal Star Wars canon. Rather, they spend countless hours rehashing and tearing down the movies, mostly The Last Jedi. I mostly feel like 9 should embrace the fans of The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, and just finish setting up the franchise for the next 20 plus years, so that it can grow with a new generation. But I'm 51 years old, and have been a fan of Star Wars most of my life. I sincerely hope that people of my generation, and other fans who have grown up with Star Wars as an important part of their lives, will find a way to come along with Disney/Lucasfilm into the future of the franchise. In order for 9 to bring us together to any degree, several things need to happen. The movie must respect what has come before. It doesn't have to dwell on the past or even build upon the past, but it must respect the past in a way that leaves what has come before it intact and relevant. The movie needs to help fans care more about the new leads without damaging the legacy characters. Many fans are still angry with how Han, Chewie, Luke, Akbar, and their beloved characters have been portrayed so far. Including legacy characters in the new movie should be done in a way that honors them and their iconic roles. They shouldn't be left lesser than they were before the sequels were told. The fans need to start looking for bridges between what has come before and what is unfolding now. No matter how well 9 respects and honors the past, if the angry fan base isn't willing to come in with a positive mindset, willing to suspend belief, and earnestly enjoy the movie and the story being told, then no amount of good storytelling will help bring them along. For the last point above, Disney and Lucasfilm needs to extend an olive branch to the angry fanbase. I'm hoping that they have an extended road tour, visiting fan conventions throughout 2019 with George Lucas, Mark Hamill, Dave Filoni, and other respected franchise figures. They need to be boosting 9 and answering many of the criticisms of The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi directly. This won't be an easy task, but if done well, it could do a lot to help open minds so that 9 has a chance of being received more positively by those who are most vocally criticizing things today. Lastly, I am personally very excited for 9, and I'm extremely happy with almost everything that Disney has been doing with their franchise since purchasing it. I enjoyed Rebels, I love The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, and I have renewed interest in the novels that have been released. Resistance is growing on me, and I can't wait to visit the theme park at Disney World to enjoy the new Star Wars experience. For me, it's a great time to be a Star Wars fan. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about what I or anyone else had to say in this video, or to offer up suggestions for the next question of the week. Either way, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.